Hi, I'm New Mexico attorney Nadia Cabrera Mazio, and today we're going to talk about 5 easy, non legal ways to make contracts easier to read. Number one is design. Every good contract starts with a good design, but this is something that's so rarely talked about. Here you can see a good example from the book Typography for Lawyers. This is a one-person font license agreement, and this is their before example because they're going to show you how design makes all the difference. Obviously, visually, this is not something that I want to read. Everything is kind of in one block, and nothing's broken up. There's very little white space, and nothing jumps out at me. So I don't know what sections are more important than others and what is truly worth my time to read if I'm in a pinch or if I'm like many people who only skim the agreements that I'm entering into. But you can see here, look at that difference. This is just all design. The content of what's in this contract is exactly the same as the previous version we saw. But here you can see that each section is clearly numbered. Every single paragraph has its own number, so you can easily go back and see and refer to specific sections. There's some bold in there, but not too much, enough to draw attention to the most important parts that the writer of the contract wants to point attention to, and their use of columns also makes it easier to read. And then, of course, you can see that the use of white space really makes a difference as a whole, looking at the document visually, like, okay, this is something that I can at least try to read and understand. Number two goes right along with the contract design is formatting. You can format your contract template however you want, and it will not affect the legal enforceability of the document. So here is an example of a contract that I wrote. It's a service agreement. I redacted all of the personal information. I will also point out the background section. I always like to include a background section because it gives the context of the agreement. And that part is usually not legally binding, so you can go ahead and just use layman's term to describe the transaction and the relationship between the parties. So here you can see a lot of white space also. Every section is in its own little chunk that overall gives it a sense of, okay, I can at least try to read this. And this is the approach to contract drafting that I learned in law school, which I have stuck with because I do think it makes it overall easier to read. Each section, basically each paragraph also has its own little title so that you can easily refer back to it. Each paragraph also has its own number, again, so that you can easily refer back to it. And there's, yeah, lots of space. It's overall much easier to read and inviting. The third non-legal way that you can make a contract easier to read is by breaking up paragraphs and long sentences. One good example we have here, this is from a um, home sale like brokerage agreement in New Jersey. It's from a standard form from the New Jersey Realtors Association, so it's not likely to be able to be changed unless they change it themselves with their own attorneys. However, it is a good example of how breaking up a long paragraph can make it just that much easier to read. Here you can see this one long paragraph. This is a double offender because it's not only is it one really dense long paragraph, but it's all one sentence too. So if you really want to avoid that, there's no reason why it has to be this way. Visually, just looking at that big chunk, I don't really want to read it, but it's actually a very important part because it talks about a section or if certain conditions are met, then the seller, which is the person signing this agreement, will have to pay the broker a commission even after the contract terminates. So it's not something you want to miss. Below here, you can see that same exact language. I didn't change anything, but just broken up. Here from this first sentence, it's small enough where, okay, I can at least read that. And it gives you visual clues about what is happening in the context of the document. Here we have if. Okay, so I know if one, two, if these two things happen, then the seller will have to pay the broker the commission even after termination of the agreement. So just these visual cues alone give the reader an idea of what's happening, of what they can expect when they're reading this, and that makes it easier to skim it if they truly want to skim it. They still have at least some idea of what this paragraph requires. Number 4, use party names that make sense. A perfect example is I see a lot of like lease agreements that use the terms lessee and lessor. Those are not only archaic legal terms, but they're also very similar. In general, you can name the parties whatever you want, as long as you define it in the recitals, which is that beginning portion of the document, as long as you define what you're going to call each party there and use those terms consistently throughout the document, you can call the parties whatever you want. In general, it makes sense to use like legally recognized terms, but there may be better terms even for something like lessee and lessor, like landlord and tenant. Those things mean exactly the same thing. They're also accepted legal terms and they're much more common and easier to understand. And finally, number 5, if things from the template don't apply to the transaction that you're entering into, just take them out. As an example for this, I'll use the one that can't easily be changed, which is that brokerage agreement for a home sale in New Jersey. And the reason why I have access to a New Jersey one is because a family member is selling a house in New Jersey, and they asked me for help just deciphering what was even required of them with this document because there's so much in there that doesn't even apply. There's a lot of legalese, and visually it's kind of difficult to read because everything's kind of together in really long paragraphs and dense sentences. So here you can see this is an exclusive agreement, which you would only know if you go back and look at this one tiny box in this dense paragraph that was checked to tell you that it's exclusive. It's also for sale. This entire form is kind of like 2 contracts in one. It's a form for a home sale and for renting a home. So that right there is a red flag. Just have 2 separate agreement forms for a sale and for a lease so that it's less confusing for the ordinary reader. So here you can see this whole section B, that doesn't apply. Section C, purchased by tenant, also doesn't apply because this is a home sale and not a lease. Section D, this does apply. And then section C, only part of it applies because it's an exclusive agreement. So the paragraph talking about a non-exclusive agreement also doesn't apply. So it's really only a few paragraphs in this entire page that apply. And you should want to make it easier for the reader to understand what you're trying to say, what you're trying to hold them to in this agreement. Yes, making it easier for the reader to read and understand the agreement will just overall set the tone for a more smooth transaction and business relationship. However, if you are a business or individual in New Mexico and you need help reviewing your documents, you can hire me to do that at honestcontracts.com.